that I think the Iranians are sort of hedging both ways. They have shown, especially this reformist president, that they're prepared to potentially sit back and do another nuclear agreement with the West. But I think what this partnership and the overall policy and rhetoric shows is that they're also preparing for a scenario where that deal doesn't happen.
An intriguing story in the Times now involving Iran and their nuclear capability. Secret diplomatic missions between Russia and Iran are happening with a view not only to bolster military and defence capabilities, but to advance Iran's nuclear programme. This is what the Times is reporting. Nigar Mortazavi is a senior fellow at the Centre for International Policy and host of the Iran podcast. Nigar, good evening to you.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for being with us. The Iranian President and Vladimir Putin are due to meet, aren't they, in Moscow on Friday? They're going to sign a comprehensive strategic partnership, which will have many people concerned. What do we know about what the two nations might have planned?
Well, we don't know much about the details yet, but what we know as far as background and history over the years is that Iran does rely on Russia as one of its important strategic partners, especially when it comes to military and defense protection. So Iran, depending on which faction obviously you talk about, but the overall policy of the state is to look both east and west. And when we talk about looking to east, Russia and China, the two major powers, Eastern powers, obviously two veto powers of the UN Security Council, are the two main sort of countries that Iran looks to. China more for trade, financial business ties, but to Russia more for military and potentially support. We know they were allies in Syria, just until recently when the Syrian leader Assad left or fled to Moscow, and there have been other partnerships. This is also as Russia's relations with the West has soured and has been shifting and changing. Iran has supplied Russia in the war in Ukraine with technology and drones. So it's a kind of sort of long-term policy that Iran has had. And we've also seen more of a shift to the east after the U.S. pulled out of the nuclear deal and after the U.S. imposed more sanctions on Iran that the Europeans also comply with. We've seen more of that shift to the east. So this very much comes in line with that long-term policy of looking east.
There is a concern that Moscow is ready to cross those previously drawn red lines on the Iran nuclear programme, despite the collapse of the Iran nuclear deal. How does the West mitigate for that? How do they try and allow for an ever-existent but perhaps more motivated interest from Iran to keep progressing with nuclear?
Well, I want to be careful when we say red lines that Western intelligence so far has shown that Iran has not made a decision to weaponize its nuclear program. So far, the intelligence and information we have, and also the monitoring of the UN watchdog IAEA, shows that it's a civilian program, but Iran is very much pushing towards the line or to the brink of becoming what we call a threshold state, essentially to be able to have enough fissile material within a civilian program to, when they decide to eventually break out to a weapon, be able to use it. But that hasn't happened yet. So we're talking hypotheticals. So far, but policymakers, Western diplomats, and the overall sort of history and background of the West's main problem with this program has shown that potentially the successful way to try to curb Iran's nuclear program and have real successful insight has been done through diplomacy, which came in the form of the nuclear deal, the JCPOA under the Obama administration. And it gave unprecedented access, monitoring by the nuclear watchdog and essentially to the world, insight into Iran's nuclear program. After the US pulled out of the program, Iran started reducing its compliance, the monitoring, the access of the nuclear watchdog. And now there's that fear from the West that if Iran decides to make that step to weaponize and be doing it in secret, that they wouldn't have sort of that insight. But what I want to say here is that I think the Iranians are sort of hedging both ways. They have shown, especially this reformist president, that they're prepared to potentially sit back and do another nuclear agreement with the West. But I think what this partnership and the overall policy and rhetoric shows is that they're also preparing for a scenario where that deal doesn't happen and the US goes for an all-out attack. And with Donald Trump coming into presidency, into the White House again, it really is a toss-up even for us here, Iran watchers, US watchers in Washington. Nobody can say with certainty he says he wants to deal with Iran, but would it end up being attacking, military attacks on the table? So I think the Iranians are also sort of looking at that potential for a deal with the West, but also what if things go sour or go wrong, and they would need that kind of protection and support from Russia ongoing.
Look, thanks so much for lending us your expertise this evening. Really interesting stuff there. Nagar Mortazavi, who is a senior fellow at the Centre for International Policy and host of the Iran podcast. Good to speak to you again, Nagar. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.
اللجان التنظيمية اتجهوا إلى الجهة الغربية. يخرها بدي يوسعوا الحليقة. أيها الإسرائيلي والأمريكي فلتنظر إلى جبائل أوحد فلتنظر الوصول تحديا لك في وجهك أيها المغرور هؤلاء من سلاح قبيلة واحدة من جبائل اليمن. حرام اني متاهل في العالم قبعت عنا حياة من دنيا انها لا يعصدكم عدد يتمنوا حتى ولا نخشى جناب الحنان المليكة كتبنا سيفنا